Hello, everyone. Welcome back to PopCultX, our little talks where we have a conversation with creative-minded people. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by John Avina of Avina Comics. He is a creative, passionate storyteller who has his own line of comic books that we're excited to dive into. So, John, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really cool. I met you, I think, through social media, which I think is really great. And one of the fascinating reasons to be on social media is to get to meet creative people like yourself. But other than that, I don't really know much of your story. So can you tell us a little bit of your background? How did you get into the comic book field? I looked on your website, saw that you had quite a wide breadth of experience before you got into comic books. So maybe just give us a little background of who you are, what makes you you.
Yeah. So I went to film school in like 2013. Made a bunch of short films, did a lot of work like that with my friends. And then from there, I ended up becoming like a wedding photographer.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. So I really dug doing that. And then the pandemic hit in like 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And like I saw a bunch of people being creative, doing like really fun stuff. And that was something that like I kind of envied. And then Scott Snyder, who did like Batman and all these other things, started doing like a writing class where he would take people's pitches and stuff. So I had a bunch of scripts that I had written that I had nothing that I could do with because I can't shoot a movie on my own like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just transitioned them into screenplays or into comics.
Nice.
Yeah. And then I started working with a bunch of super cool artists and stuff. And I was able to, make Lockjaw and Beast Stiletto was my first one.
Thank you, everyone.
That's the guy.
Yeah. Really cool. I'm reading through that one right now.
Awesome. Yeah. So I made that. I got a lot of great feedback from like Scott and people in his class. And then I fell in love with it. So over the course of like 2 years, I came out with 11 titles, I think is what we're at right now.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So it's been a busy couple of years, still doing weddings. I worked at a funeral home during the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'm a funeral director right now. So I still do that. So it's like Monday through Friday, funeral directing. Saturday, Sundays are for weddings.
Wow. That's interesting. That's quite the difference between weddings and funerals, right? So
yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And then just making comics anytime I get a free second.
Wow. That's quite something. I mean, I have my own day job, which is with website design stuff, but to be able to see people in their emotional highs and lows, that must either be draining or very educational for you.
Yeah, a lot of it comes out in my work. There's a book that we just finished called Americana.
Mm-hmm.
And that started as a screenplay. And then when I started making it as a comic, I just took from my experience, like doing weddings and then doing funerals. And on one occasion, I did the wedding and then the groom had passed like 2 months after the wedding.
Oh, man.
So then they had me help with the funeral because they knew what I did. And that, like, it's really easy not to be emotional at like funerals and stuff because I work them so often, but that one, because I knew the couple, I had just been with the family, that all kind of like cascaded. And then from there, that makes it into the book.
Wow. That's something. So you are really taking from your own personal experience and delivering it into comics and your writing. That's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's something else. I can't imagine doing that. I've also done wedding photography as well. So I know the feeling of, actually, I kind of do know what you're talking about a little bit. So I shot a wedding once where the bride and groom, they were great, did that. But one of their wedding guests, one of the good friends that was in the wedding party, she passed like a couple weeks afterwards. So they contacted me for a picture of her that they had saw in the grouping because they wanted to use that at the funeral. So I kind of understand that emotion. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It is something. It really is. But pulling from your experiences, and you do your comic books really are heavily centered on Latino characters and Mexican American heritage, which you have, and it's a lot of it in your writing. Is that something, stories that you were told growing up? Is that something you lived with?
So yeah, my mom was a mariachi singer when I was little.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so like I grew up going to like the bars and stuff she would perform at because like my uncle owned it, and it was just like all my cousins were there. So it was like a family thing, even though it was like
Uh-huh.
a club in downtown. So I would sit there and they had the mural of the Aztec warrior holding like the dead
Hmm.
woman. And from like that point on, I wanted to know more about that. And in Chicago, there's a place in Pilsen called like the Mexican like art museum.
Okay.
And in grade school, we would go there a lot for like field trips because it was like down the street. And I fell in love with like the art, the color, all that stuff. But I didn't see it translated into like the cartoons I watched.
Yeah.
And the most we got was like that Mucha Lucha show. I don't know if you remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like it was like little bits here and there, but not enough to like really like satisfy what I was looking for. So then as I started writing for like school and stuff, I wrote that because I thought, well, that will make me different. I want to tell like
Mm-hmm.
Stephen King style stories or horror stories, but I need to give it that little twist so that way when people read it, they'll know like, oh, that's a John Avina thing. He took something that could have just been like generic and then he made it a little like Latin or a little native just to kind of give it that like that kick to it.
Yeah, and I think that's very important. I come from a mixed heritage background, and unfortunately, I didn't grow up with either. So I've been really exploring, especially ever since I started this podcast and speaking with creative people like you who are very heavily influenced by their cultural upbringing. So I've been really diving into my Mexican upbringing and my Jewish upbringing or heritages, I guess. And to hear this is great. I mean, to see that you're mixing that into your to your storytelling, and you're weaving in traditional stories and bringing them in to the mainstream, I guess, so to speak, right? It's
Yeah.
really cool. I mean, I when I was reading Lockjaw, your the mariachi band in there, Los Lobos, it really it hit me. I was like, I remember Los Lobos, the famous, from La Bamba
Yeah.
and stuff. So I went back and I was just listening to all their music, and they have some great songs that I hadn't even heard of in such a long time. So it was really cool that you sparked that memory of for me. So that's really cool.
Yeah, that's something I really wanted to do too. Cause like I went from living in the city
Hmm.
till like eighth grade and then moving to the suburbs. And it was like a culture shock.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, cause I remember we tried it when I was in third grade, getting me to a school in the suburbs. And I had an accent because my dad's from Mexico. So
Okay.
I would speak and like roll R's in regular words.
Hmm.
And my teacher called me out on it. So like I had to take like the vocab book to the front of the class and read through words. And I remember like cat, I would say like with the like the Spanish
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So I
Uh-huh.
would say like cat, and then she was like, no, cat, and it was
Oh
like
my
over and
goodness.
over, but in front of my class. So I learned to speak without it because it was like a survival thing. I was in third grade. I
Yeah.
didn't want to be different. So when I'm writing these things, I was like, well, that people will relate to that, especially like if you grew up like mixed background or if you grew up
Hmm.
like with that Latino-ness and not really knowing what to do with it. Cause there's like that line in Selena where you have to be more American than the Americans and more Mexican than the Mexicans.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was just like, that was my entire life. So for me, that was scary enough where a lot of like the horror that'll be in like Americana or in Cinema Muerte is that little twist to it where it's
Hmm.
just like, it's not the monsters that are always scary. Sometimes it's the environment.
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that.
Yeah.
You, you mentioned Cinema Muerte, and that was a great book that
Oh, thank
I've
you.
read so far, and it's I really had a almost like a almost like you were telling my story when I was reading through with about John. I don't know if there was any self of yourself in there with that,
Yeah.
but but for me it was like, wow, yeah, this guy is just like me. So many different projects, and I can't pick one just to finish.
Yeah.
I like have hands everywhere, and I just can't pick one to see through. Is that kind of like you there? Is that like how you approach things?
Yeah, so I worked at a comic book store while I was going to college.
Okay.
So the them working at a comic book store came directly from that. So John is me.
Okay.
Emily is my wife. Like
Oh,
my wife's
nice.
name is Emily. She's a redhead, and Chris is my best friend.
All right.
So all of it, like the conversation they have in the van in those early pages,
Hmm.
is a conversation we've had where like Chris would just find like scrap ideas that I had and I would just leave it in the back seat, or we'd drive and I'd be like, all right, I got a pitch. And then I would just pitch out the story. And they're like, well, what are you going to do with it? I was like, obviously nothing. Like, what can I do? Yeah. And like so many conversations were like that, where it's just like, I'm going to make this thing. And they're like, awesome, let's do it. And then a week later, I'm like, I've, I've moved on. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. I started putting together a budget and they're like, well, just write it so you have it. And I'm like, well, if I write it, I want to make it. So better not to write it than to sit on it.
Hmm.
But now with comics, it's easier because now if I have an idea, I already kind of know which one of my artists I like for that project. And then I'll like adjust the script length to a budget and then send it to them. And then we can make things and get it. So that's the nice thing about comics is
Ah.
you get to create stuff. But yeah,
Hmm.
Cinema
Hmm.
Muerte is very yeah. I mean, I'm teaching. I started doing a Patreon
I was going to get
where
to that, but okay, go
yeah, yeah.
ahead.
Sorry. So I started doing a Patreon because a lot of people do ask me like, well, how do you do it? And through Patreon, I want to teach. I want to show
Yeah.
people like if I could do it, you definitely can do it. Because like, and I've already made every mistake you can doing it. I have a book out that I just have to letter, but now I'm rethinking pages and panels. So
Oh
either
goodness.
I redo those pages or I just letter it and just let it die because I know I'm not going to love it.
Hmm.
So I have to find a place for it, but I already made that mistake.
Mm.
So that's the nice thing.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I mean, but the good thing is, and through a lot of people that we've spoken to here on the show, have really had that mindset of like you, it's like, you know what? I just need to create it. I need to make it.
Yeah.
And from that passion for the project that they have, they've spurned something great. So it's like, do you what I guess what kind of advice, you speaking of teaching a class, would you give to someone who's maybe on that verge of should I do it? Should I not do it? Is there any like
You'll yeah, you'll
free
always
tidbit?
find you'll always find a reason not to do the work. Like that's the easiest the easiest thing is to not do it.
Yeah.
But if that story is something you keep coming back to, you owe it to that thought to bring it to life. Like if it keeps bugging you, it's because it wants to live. It needs to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
So just do it. And even if the only person that reads it is you, then at least you have something. Because a lot of people will like they want to work for Marvel, they want to work for DC, they want to already be a big creator.
Yeah.
You don't get there unless you've made something.
Yeah.
So make it. And
Yeah.
you never know what the thing is that people are going to like. A lot of times, like projects that I thought people would like. So I did Lucha Forever, my wrestling book. Yeah. And I thought that would be the one that people stop at the booth to read. And it's not. People will grab this one I have called The Last Paletero on the Block
Mm-hmm.
because they like the name. And
Mm-hmm.
that, like they'll grab it and they'll flip through it. And I'm preparing for a con tomorrow. And I didn't do a reorder because I got in kind of last minute and I only have like one copy left
Ooh.
because I didn't realize I sold through so many. So I'm just like, okay, like now I know like there is readers there. So when I reorder to make it. So if you have a story, just make it. Just write it down, make it, find an artist. Finding an artist is easy. The only difficult part about artists is like you have to pay them quickly and on time because
Mm-hmm.
they're doing that hard, like they're actually doing the labor. So work with them, pay them, and just get it made. Just
Yeah.
even if it just sits on your shelf, it'll be happier on the shelf than a thought that you like
In
shout
your
out to
head.
people at a bar. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's cool. That's cool. I will definitely link in the description box here all of your Patreon information, your website, and everything like that, so people can go find it and subscribe to it and learn more about it and
Yeah.
learn the process that you've been through, so that way they can tell their story as well.
Yeah, and we're doing like one-on-ones too. So
Oh, nice.
so a lot of times people they'll have like a pitch or maybe they have art and they want to learn something about storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I failed enough doing some stuff that I'm like, I can give you that advice. Like, I know exactly where you're gonna go because you're gonna try to cut this corner. Don't do it. Yeah,
That's funny. Don't do the mistakes that I did. I made them for you.
exactly. This is for us. I did this.
Now, you said you had about 11 titles that you've written.
Yeah.
Do you have like your favorite child?
Right now it's Americana. It's the
Okay.
book I can't stop pitching to people.
Okay.
It's harder because that one is like it's a very Stephen King story. It's a story about a boy named Chewy living in a small town, and his dad comes back into his life after being gone for like I think it's 10 years.
Oh, okay.
So now it's the boy, his dad, and the boy learned how to navigate the world without him. So the dangers and stuff of this town, the kid can maneuver through. But the
Okay.
dad is hitting every pitfall as they go
Oh.
because yeah. So it's a lot of that, but then there's a creature in the town that feeds off of like high emotions. So
Mm.
now that the boy and the father are reconnecting, obviously emotions are going to flare up and
Hmm.
now it has its eyes on the boy.
Very cool. I have that
Yeah.
here. I need to read through that one. That one looks really, really interesting. So I'm looking forward to reading that one. Yeah, I really enjoy your writing and your writing style. So
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to, like I said, reading through more of it. And the last paletero on the block, I when I saw that on your Instagram, I think I saw it, I was like, oh wow, I could picture like Danny Trejo playing that, like pushing a cart around the neighborhood. And it's just like I fan casted it already. So it was. Do you have like when you write your some of your stories? Do you have like if you were to make them films? You said you came from a film background. Do you like maybe write it with like a certain actor in mind?
Every one of them. So for uh for Lockjaw, it was Diego Luna
Oh, okay, okay.
because there's a villain that's going to show up later on that I wanted it to be the other guy from Y Tu Mamá También.
Oh, Gael Garcia
The guy,
Bernal. Yep,
yeah. So I wanted it to be him. So I was like, I love them together.
that's cool. Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
do that again. So I was working on that. For the last Paletero, there's a movie called A Better Life, and he was also in like the movie Savages, and he shows up as a bad guy in a lot of stuff. But in this movie, A Better Life, it was like I in film school, our first movie had to be like a 5 minute short. So
Okay.
I wrote it about a story about a father and son. The mom died. It's a year later, and the dad's now just kind of waking up to the idea like I
Mm,
haven't taken care of my kid,
mm-hmm.
and that's what that other movie was about. And I was working at Barnes and
Oops.
Noble at the time, and I picked up the Blu-ray because it was like a father son walking, and it looked like Southern California. So I was like, oh, what's this about? I read the back, and I was like, no, this is my movie. So I bought it, and there was a line in my movie that I was so proud of where the dad yells at the son like, well, why aren't you in school? And the kid's like, well, it's Saturday. And I love that. That's how out of
Uh,
touch the dad was. And in the middle of that movie, the father and son are screaming at each other, and the dad turns and he is like, well, why aren't you in school? Like, you're
oh
cutting
no.
school. And the kid's like, Dad, it's Saturday. And I was like, they took all of it. Like my whole like, and obviously they didn't, right? Because why would they know who I was?
Right,
But it
right.
was, yeah. But I even showed it to like my class afterwards. I was like, do you guys remember that movie I wrote like the first week here? They're like, yeah. I was like, well, watch this. And I put it on. And it's like Marty McFly playing that song. And yeah, I was like, all right, well, I was like, at
Listen
least
to
I knew I
this.
was onto something. Yeah. But
That's really
so
cool.
I had him for that. I had Diego Luna for Lockjaw. I had that guy for the last Paletero. And for Americana, because the dad is American, I
Mhm.
had what's his name? Skeet Ulrich, the guy from Scream. Billy, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I had him cast for him.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
So for yeah, and for there's an issue of Lockjaw that just came out called Lockjaw and Van Helsing. It's like a prequel-ish book.
Nice.
And in there's a guy named Cochillos that is Danny Trejo. I even gave him a chest tattoo and all of it. So
Very cool.
yeah.
That's really cool. That's now how how, I guess, for the future of Avina Comics. Now, I think it's really interesting. So you've taken on a lot of roles within this comic book industry for yourself. You're the writer, you're the publisher. So, which has been more difficult for you learning the ins and outs, the publishing side of it or the writing side of it?
The publishing side of it. The writing side, I just have to kick my own butt sometimes and be like, just do it, and then it'll get done. The publishing side, I have to deal with a lot more people. Doing press is new to me, like doing the interviews. You can't survive in this unless you reach out to other people. And that's just not something I've ever really been comfortable with. So like doing the work for that. And then like getting on social media. So I had a TikTok account that I only used for like Magic the Gathering.
Nice.
But now I use it for comics, and I've gotten like some warm reception to it. I've started like putting out content that's comic created, but now I'm spending less time writing, and I'm doing that. So it's balancing because you have to wear a lot of hats because I'm like a party of one.
Yeah.
And so that's tough. And then I have a couple of stories that I'm working on that I'm finishing up that I'm getting ready to submit to publishers like Image, Dark Horse, because once I start writing for like someone bigger and I start to build the following because like other people will know my name outside of like my booth at a convention.
Yeah.
If I write something and no publisher wants to pick it up then for like another project, well, at least I know I have a home for it under my own label.
That's true.
So then it kind of like alleviated some of that fear I had of like, well, what if they turn it down? And I was like, well, make it myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. That's really cool. I mean, not that you, I mean, the fallback and safety net is great, but you always want to push for that bigger, publishing house, I guess. But it is great that how if you have to, you could do it yourself, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and a lot of like Lockjaw was originally something I submitted to a few publishers, and it got rejected. And like right away took it personally. Oh, I did this wrong. I should have done this. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, no, they came out with like a weird Western a month before I did my pitch. So like that slot was full. And then like a lot of publishers have Westerns because they're really easy genre pieces to fill that spot. And even though Lockjaw isn't necessarily like your typical Western, it's close enough in that vein that that's how they're going to sell it. So I just realized like, well, try to put it out on your own and see how people feel about it. And people tend to like it. Like when the two biggest sellers I have in my booth are Cinema Muerte and Lockjaw. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. I mean, I know I don't like criticism of my own stuff, so I can only imagine, and I haven't, sent anything out to be rejected for myself. Is that something that you've learned to deal with better, I guess, or is it something that you're still trying to figure out how to process that?
So whenever I get rejected, I fall back to like my comfort media. Like I'll watch movies, like I'll watch Pan's Labyrinth because that was a movie that nobody wanted Guillermo del Toro to make. And I was like, but look what came from it. Back to the Future was a script that nobody wanted to shoot because they're like, it's got Pepsi, and like there was too much going against it, but everyone loves it now. And in Back to the Future, there's like the scene with George McFly where he was like, I don't know, like what if I send it out? What if they say no good? And you don't watch that movie as much as I have and not like kind of realize you're George McFly. So I got over it quickly. So like I send out my books every once in a while for like reviews or for like to do publish or press and stuff. And sometimes people will come back and they'll give it like a B or C. They'll be like, I liked it, but it felt very familiar here. And maybe if I knew where it was going, I'd be into it more. So I try to listen to what they say in like the reviews. Because if it is something that I think, oh, okay, that was something I was worried about, they caught that, fix it for the next one. But if it's but if it's something out of like left field where they're like, I don't think a mariachi player would be able to like blast a werewolf, I'm going to be like, well, obviously. Yeah. So you just take each review because people are crazy. And like
Mm-hmm.
people will come to my table at like a convention and flip through the comic and then just like ask me about random things. They're like, well, like this is a ghost, right? I'm like, yeah. They're like, well, why is it here? I'm like, well, if you read it, you'd understand. And then they'll like close the book or whatever. But there's a lot of that. So like each review I just take on like a one-on-one basis.
Mm-hmm.
And if I think there's some merit, it'll sit somewhere. But something new that I've learned and something I want to teach people is if people say something negative, like don't just accept that because you already thought that about yourself and about your work, because that's just confirming something that you have to unteach yourself.
Yeah.
And then your writing will get better. If you go into it saying like, oh, I'm writing this scene, I know people are going to hate it, then don't write it, change it. Like it's that simple. And like one of my teachers that I had in film school, I still talk to like on a regular basis because she's like my go-to for everything. And she told me like, well, what's the meanest thing you've said today, like this week? And why was it towards yourself?
Mm.
Yeah. And once you have that mentality, when you start writing, everything gets easier because then I'll write it and be like, oh, that's dumb. I'm like, is it dumb or did you not explain it well enough? Go back and fix it. Forgive yourself while you're writing. Version one of any script is for you alone.
Mm-hmm.
Version two is better for the public. So like write your script, make it too long, make it sloppy. Version two, fix it. Like you know what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because anyone can write, but writers write the second version or third or fourth. Yeah.
Yeah. That's true. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
What now? Have you always been a fan of comic books? Is that something that you've always been into?
Yeah. So I remember my first comic. My dad was a truck driver. So a lot of times I would like hop on the truck with him and we do like delivery runs and stuff.
Okay.
And we stopped by this little like bodega thing that had a comic spinner.
Mm-hmm.
And like I would look at it, I was like, oh, I know Batman, but I know him from the cartoon, or I knew the X-Men, but I knew him from the cartoon. And they had Bartman, the Simpsons character, there. And I was like, I didn't know they made Simpsons books because I love the Simpsons.
Yeah.
So I grabbed it and I like finished it in the car. And like at the next like two stops were like small comic stands or like newsstands. And I would just pick them up and read them. Like I would just grab
Nice.
everything I could and just read it. And my dad didn't care because I was reading. So like I fell in love with it that way. And I kind of miss that comics aren't on newsstands anymore
Mm-hmm.
because that's how you can just find something new would be like, oh, I'm gonna go grab this thing and then like, oh, what's that? And then like take it home. But yeah, so since then I was reading comics and it wasn't until like I read Grant Morrison that I was like, oh, this is an art. Like it's not just like fun cartoons. Like there's
Right.
weird stuff happening here. And I'm like the right age to get into this. So I think when I was like 15 and I read Animal Man, I was like, I don't really understand what's going on here, but this is freaking me out. Then I got like super into comics. Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. Is there I guess who's like your favorite character? Would you say? Do you have like a favorite?
Oh,
Is there like for me, I know Daredevil's my favorite. So he's the street level type of superhero who's always gonna take a beating, but he always keeps coming back. So do you have a favorite in that sense?
Constantine.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Cause I like him weird. And
Yeah.
then there was like the Peter Milligan run before DC did like the new 52. And it was perfect. Like there was like very little oversight on that book. So he was just writing like like this hard life for this guy. And I loved it. Like that Peter Milligan run of it was like my favorite. And it
Okay.
was so good. And then like when that came to a close, so did Vertigo Comics for the most part.
Mm,
It was during like that weird transition.
okay.
But Constantine, especially when he was just allowed to be Constantine on his own, where trouble found him, that was
Ah.
like the golden age of like that. Cause now he's like Justice League Dark, or he's always teaming up and fighting some like bigger threat. Like if you left him alone to be like the guy in the dark,
Hmm.
that's my favorite.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, I've known about comics and everything, but haven't really dived into it too much until recently. So I really need to get broaden my comic knowledge, I guess. So I will definitely look that one up. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Go to libraries, man. Like if there's a local library by you, just like stock up and Like binge when you can. Yeah, that's how I started. So I always recommend that.
Yeah, I've been binging on like the Marvel app, the Unlimited app. So I've read so many different there. Now I just have to get to the DC app, which is different because they have their differences, but I'm more, I think, of a Marvel fan than DC. But I really enjoy DC stuff too as well.
Yeah, in Marvel, I do DC. Daredevil is my guy. Like that is the one that if there's like a Daredevil anything new, I'll be like, all right. Yeah. I'll give it a shot. I'll see what you're doing. Yeah.
I hear you.
I like your Blue Beetle wall too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's cool. We just had Blue Beetle. We had Josh Trujillo on the show and Adrian Gutierrez. So it was really fun talking with them. So I should have put your comics up there, but I wanted to have them. I want to have them closer up to the camera.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Well, one last question I have for you that I like to ask all of our guests. We are a pop culture show. So is there anything that you're currently reading, listening, watching that you find yourself reading or spending a lot of time with?
One Piece. So I just watched the live action and I watched the cartoon when I was younger because it was on like that for kids TV.
Yeah.
But I remember like me and anime have this weird relationship where like if you keep yelling your mantra to me, I can't watch it. Like Naruto, it's like I'm gonna be like, but yeah, I can't. And then like Luffy would always be like, I'm gonna be king of the pirates. And I was like, this is the 4th episode, but the 100th time you said it. But I watched the live action and it like rekindled my like love that I had for it. And now I'm like on season 3 of the anime. Like I'm trying to get through it. Behind me, I have like the box set for the manga because I bought it. And now like everything I'm reading and doing is like One Piece. And I wrote a pirate comic already, but I'm just like, before we finish it, I got to add some stuff to it. Yeah. I got to make it a little weird now. So, but One Piece, it was a lot better than I thought it was going to be.
Okay.
And it was just like, I think everyone kind of delivered in it. I feel like they actually tried, and I think everyone should at least give it a watch. I think it's worth at least one sit through.
Okay, I mean, I've scrolled past it on Netflix. I'd be like, should I watch it? Should I not? I don't know. I mean, my relationship with anime is probably a little more iffy than yours. I mean, I grew up like Ranma 1/2 was probably my favorite back in the day, and other stuff like that. My friend, a good friend from high school, he was heavily into it. And I kind of, jumped on his like tail skirts about it. So I was kind of into it a little bit, but not so much. So interesting. Okay, I'll give it a watch.
Yeah. Like by episode 3, you're going to be like, they found their rhythm. It's no longer like, I'm going to be king of the pirates. Like we move on past it, thank God. But they do really cool stuff with like the visuals and all that. And they don't shy away from the campiness, which is like, with every Batman movie, like he's grumpy, he's mad. Yeah. Like one time I want him to say "we" when he's like battering in something or like bat hooking something and like swinging through. Like he needs it. Yeah, especially when they're doing like, oh, it's Batman the early years. I'm like, and he's not smiling while he's ziplining across Gotham. Like not once. I don't believe it. Yeah, I do deal a lot with like people going through trauma because of work. And like they still crack a smile. So Batman, at least in one movie, needs to go like, as he's flying through.
That's hilarious. I could just picture that. That's awesome. Picture Batman after he grapples it, just wee. Good.
There's no way you don't.
Yeah, there's no way. Yeah. I mean, unless you're being chased or shot at. But other than that, yeah, he has to do it at some point. Yeah, definitely. Right on. Well, John, where can people find you on Instagram or TikTok or whatnot? What can they? What's your handle there?
All my socials are at Avina Comics.
Okay.
So you can find us on TikTok, on Instagram. We have the Patreon now that's at Avina Comics. Our website is avinacomics.com, where you can pick up either the digital copies or the physical copies of all of the books. And we have 3 more coming out before the end of November.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Been busy.
Hustling, yeah. So one's like a horror story called Starved Rock about a hunting trip gone wrong. We have an Americana short set in the 80s. And then we have a new Lucha Forever short about a wrestler named La Llorona. So that one's going to be a lot of fun.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much for taking some time to chat with us today. It's been really great getting to know you and learn about your comics and just you and what makes and how you put that all into your work. So thank you for taking some time today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.